Morin's alleged killer, Victor Antonio Martinez-Hernandez, began his suspected crime spree, one rife with violence against women, in his native country of El Salvador, where he's accused of murdering a woman in December of 2022. In early 2023, he crossed the U.S. southern border 3 times, but was expelled each time by Border Patrol. He finally succeeded on his 4th attempt. After that, he traveled to Los Angeles, where he's linked to the assault of a woman and a 9-year-old girl before making his way to Maryland and allegedly taking Rachel Morin's life. In December, I spoke with Rachel Morin's mother, and here's some of what she had to say.
I'm not so much, the grief hasn't left, but it's you, by carrying it, you somehow get stronger. And so it stays with you, but you're able to coincide with it, if that makes any sense.
I want to bring in Randolph Rice now, the attorney and spokesperson for Rachel Morin's family. Randolph, I appreciate you making the time tonight, and let's get into it because pretrial is expected to begin Monday in this case against the man accused of killing Rachel Morin. How is Morin's family doing as this gets underway tomorrow?
Yeah, Natasha, thanks for having me on. The family is certainly nervous and anxious about this. And I talked to Patty this past week and asked her, how she's feeling. She said, when Rachel was allegedly murdered by this suspect, she felt helpless that she wasn't there to help her. And she said she kind of has the same feelings this week, that she's helpless to not be able to help Rachel, but she is confident that the prosecutors in this case are prepared to present the evidence to the jury, and it hopes to get a conviction for Rachel.
Yeah, and let's talk more about the evidence. You have said there is a lot of it, that there is DNA, and there's also IgG, investigative genetic genealogy, which is brand new investigative work and similar to what's been used in the Bryan Kohberger case. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The DNA was a big part of this case that linked this suspect to that camera footage in Los Angeles and ultimately gave the investigators that IgG data that they were able to use to track down a family member that lived in southern Maryland. Once they had that family member, they were able to interrogate them, ask them questions that ultimately led to a name. And that name led to the suspect who was apprehended in a Tulsa, Oklahoma bar soon after they learned who he was.
Are you confident heading into this trial that the prosecution has a very strong case?
As a former prosecutor, I certainly know that it's tough. Any type of case you have, there's certainly strong evidence here. We know that there's DNA. There is a couple of problems. Obviously, there's nobody that witnesses the crime. There may be some holes that we suspect that are in the state's case, but I think the DNA evidence certainly is going to be sufficient enough to secure a conviction for Rachel.
Do you anticipate that jury selection is going to be very difficult given the high public interest that we've seen in this case?
I certainly think it's going to be difficult, but there has been a prior ruling that the court believes that the jury is going to be seated and they're not going to have any problems finding 12 people. Remember, it's not have you heard about this case, it's can you be fair and impartial in judging the evidence and the facts of this case. And I think even though Harford County is a small community, I think they've got a couple 100,000 people that they can pull from and ultimately find 12 jurors that are going to be able to sit and hear the facts and determine beyond a reasonable doubt as to his guilt or innocence.
It has been 19 months since Morin's death. It's hard to believe. And, she was a mother of 5. Can you tell us more about how her family is holding up now?
Well, it's been the first 10 months were very difficult, obviously. And I wouldn't say that they were losing hope, but certainly 10 months without knowing a suspect or anything like that was difficult on them. As soon as they obviously caught the suspect, there was some hope there. It raised the spirits of the family, but then they started preparing for the fact that there's going to be a trial, or there was a potential trial. And, when the defendant turned down the plea, ultimately that set in motion the fact that they are going to hear a trial. What's going to be tough for the family, and we prepared them for this, is that there's going to be a lot of facts that are going to come out that are going to be tough to hear for the family, a lot of pictures, a lot of images. And so they're certainly prepared for that, to see those things during the trial, but it's certainly going to be a tough couple of weeks for them during this trial.
Yes, certainly. What details in particular do you think are going to make the most difference with this jury?
Well, the DNA collected at the scene is certainly going to be one of the biggest pieces of evidence. And I understand there's copious amounts of DNA at the scene. That's going to be the key, sort of the linchpin of this case. And then ultimately linking back to that suspect that they capture. We don't know what he said. We don't know if he gave any statements or anything like that. And we'll certainly learn that. But there's a lot of evidence. There's something like 30 plus witnesses that the state has to call. So there's going to be a lot of evidence presented to this jury. And the jury just has to sort of keep it all together and make sure that they make the correct decision at the end of this trial.
Remind us, because there are far too many cases in this country and around the world involving violence against women. Even in your professional career, were you shocked by the sheer brutality of some of the details in this case?
Oh, absolutely. This is just one of the worst cases that I've seen. Like I said, as a former prosecutor and as a defense attorney, the nature of being dragged off the trail and raped and kidnapped and beaten and then murdered, it just is a horrific story. Also for this community, Harford County is a very small community. I think they have something like 6 or 7 murders a year on average. And to have something this gruesome really shook the community of Harford County.
Yeah, Randolph Rice, I really appreciate you joining tonight, and wishing the family all the best as all this gets underway. Thank you. Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find News Nation on your screen. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.